Order, and welcome to today's meeting of the Science, Innovation and Technology Select Committee. Now, the government has launched a consultation on measures to keep children safe online, including a potential ban on under-16s having social media accounts. And this is there's been a subject of a lot of debate in the media and around the country. So today we're going to examine the actual evidence for introducing a ban and compare it to some of the alternatives. Across the country, parents and experts are debating the need for a ban, and we will hear from both sides of the debate. And we'll also hear from Australia on the first few months of the restrictions that are in place there. So we've got three panels this morning, but before we come to our first set of witnesses, I really do want to place on record the committee's thanks and gratitude to those who have taken the time to contact us and provide written evidence to assist our work. And we are especially grateful to bereaved families for contributing their views. Mm-hmm. We will do our best to reflect all your views in our questions this morning. So we're going to be speaking the first set of witnesses today about the evidence and arguments in favour of introducing a ban, and I'm going to ask each member of this panel to introduce themselves the first time they come to speak. So, and my first question is just a basic question. What is the evidence for under-16s being harmed by social media use? And what are the biggest causes of harm? For example, attention-grabbing design, increasing screen time, etc. And we'll start with Frank Young.
Thank you very much. I'm Frank Young. I'm CEO of Parentkind. We represent the voice of parents, and we conduct regular polling of parents and parents' voice. That's important because when we poll parents, they are a broad cohort, and normally they divide something like 30-30-30, 40-80-20. They're equivocal. There is one issue where they're not equivocal, and that is social media bans, social media harms. Parents are overwhelmingly concerned about social media, their children's the risk of their children's access to social media. About 93% of parents tell us they think social media is harmful. You never see 93% in parent polling. It is just unheard of. This, I think, underlines just how seriously parents as a cohort take social media as a concern. They see the harm with their own eyes, with their experience of being a parent. But we have also spoken to teenagers themselves, and to give you some headlines from 16 to 18-year-olds who we polled, about 1 in 5 told us that social media had at some point made them feel like life was not worth living. About a third are regularly receiving sexual imagery or messages from strangers. That rises to about a half actually for girls, for teenage girls. And another third are receiving extremely violent or gory images regularly. So I think the dangers and risks for children, but also for parents, are very clear, and that's why they're concerned.
Thank you. I understand, and we will be. I understand that you've set out the opinions, the views of parents, and the risks, and we will come to look at that in more detail. But I did ask you about evidence,
yes.
about actual evidence, studies, scientific learnings, etc. Is there actual evidence
for the harm?
For the harms?
Well, there is. I mean, we have conducted polling of young people themselves, asking them to tell us about the harms they are receiving as older teenagers. What are their experiences as teenagers going through adolescence, childhood now? That is nationally representative polling, so we stand by it and we believe it has credibility. And when a third are telling us that they are regularly receiving imagery, sexual imagery, violent imagery that we just simply would not tolerate ourselves, that I think is the evidence that underpins parents' worries.
Concerns, right. So that's the the evidence of experience.
That's right, and we speak for parents too, and that we try to be their voice.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Fuljambe?
Yes, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Becky Fuljambe. I'm a GP in North Yorkshire and founder of Health Professionals for Safer Screens. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you. So, looking at if we're looking at evidence from a health professional perspective, we have found it quite frustrating that there's so little research to date that looks at the actual health outcomes in our children.
Right.
And you will have seen that the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges came out with 22 medical colleges from different specialties recently and declared this issue as a public health emergency. So it is important to say from our perspective as clinicians that we consider what we see in practice as valid evidence of the harm these children are coming to on these platforms. We believe that this harm is increasing day by day, week by week, year on year, and is showing no signs of decreasing. Just to look at the kind of mechanisms of harm, we'll go from the first principle that frustrates us as doctors. It's our job to first do no harm, and we believe that any product for children should be the same. It should do no harm. So when we look at, from our perspective, how social media is so strongly implicated in a lot of the presentations we see in children, we've become very worried. So just to start with health misinformation, we're just to look at the health misinformation for young women. So the uptake of hormonal contraception has gone down by over 50% in the last 15 years. And that's resulted, the women's health leaders in this country say that has been predominantly fueled by misinformation on TikTok, telling young women that hormonal contraception is going to make them fat, infertile, cause brain tumours. And this is really damaging for young women, and we've seen a direct drop-off in their uptake of hormonal contraception. Our teenage pregnancies are back on the rise after decades of work to bring them down, and we have the highest ever rates of abortions in our young women at the moment. And this is driving inequality as well, because we know that women from deprived backgrounds are 3 times more likely to have an abortion and 20 years less of health. We're seeing profound relationship damage, and we're experiencing that in consultations with young women and men. We know that there is an absolute epidemic of CSAM on the internet, naked pictures of our children everywhere. The CSAM reported from the Internet Watch Foundation was the worst on record. It went up 7% just from last year, over 300,000 sites just that they found of child sexual abuse material. We know that 90% of that is self-generated, and that over half of the perpetrators are actually under 18. And they've seen a 260-fold increase in AI-generated CSAM, and 65% of which is the worst category of sexual abuse. So is it any wonder that organisations like the Institute for Addressing Strangulation have found that 1/3 of our 16 to 24-year-olds are strangling or choking each other at least once during sex? We've seen a direct increase in violence that our children are reporting on animals and towards each other. We've had a recent case of a child who watched animal cruelty on a smartphone from a child who showed him at school and went home and killed a litter of puppies, and then came to us with severe nightmares. He'd watched a video of how to do that on social media through someone at school. It's no surprise that the highly visual, constant image and video-based content is partially fueling our increase in eating disorder symptoms. And when we look at sleep, this has been strongly evidence-based as being directly impacted by smartphones for the past decade. Very strong evidence base. And we know that children are late-night scrolling in huge numbers. Ofcom themselves found that up to 24% of our 18 to 14-year-olds last year were found to be on their smartphones between 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. We know it interrupts in all of that, and we know that anything that interferes with sleep provokes impulsive behaviours, accidents, difficulties controlling emotions, and triggers worsening mental health symptoms. They're just a few of the areas. Yes. Evidence for under 16s, I have some.
Thank you very much. That's very sobering evidence of the impact of specific types of content and misinformation. Adam, I'll bring you in now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, both. Becky, particularly thank you for your really clear introduction there. My understanding is there's not really a consensus on a causal relationship between social media and negative outcomes. Given what we're discussing today, a potential ban on social media for under 16s, in your view, is there enough hard evidence to justify such a ban?
There's more than enough, and we need to look at what we are considering to be evidence. So university-based evidence, as important as it is only a small part of the evidence that we should be looking at. And we would say that the evidence at the moment, there's so little looking at the actual health outcomes that I've said. It's looking through a very narrow lens, using traditional research scope and processes that takes time. And what really troubles me is that it goes from a baseline of children being completely desensitised to this current level of digital surveillance, social comparison, pressure to conform, and all these norms pushed by addictive algorithms. And we know that there is evidence, alarming evidence coming up, even from universities using traditional research paradigms, of things like the addictive way these children are using these smartphones, predominantly watching social media, is consistently being shown to show an increase in suicidal acts later down the line. And we know that any deliberate self-harm and attempts at suicide is grossly underestimated in the clinical world. A lot of it, we don't even know what's going on. So to see that coming to us in bigger numbers is a real concern. And when we're talking about cause in medicine, we look at things in public health being significant components that make up the chain that leads to the outcome. So we know that mental health has a variety of outcomes. We would very strongly say as doctors that those mental health outcomes are being eroded significantly by this component of children's use of social media. Okay. And we use the Bradford Hill criteria to find cause. That was really the only way we ever escaped the tobacco vice. And when you look at things like adverse childhood experiences, that's accepted that it is a causative agent in mental and physical health problems because it's strength of association, consistency, plausibility, temporality, but all that is associative and correlational, and we can never do experimental evidence on that. And I think we've got to that place here with social media. We know how much harm it's causing.
I accept that, Becky, and I think that's very clearly argued. If we work under the assumption there's plenty of evidence for the damage it does to children, there is a risk then that when kids turn 17, what's really the difference between a child who's 16, 364 days old versus 17 years old? And is there a risk of the floodgates opening, essentially a cliff edge, when a child turns 17 and the potential impact on their mental health as a result of that?
I struggle with the cliff edge analogy. Yeah. If we are associating the use of social media to cliff edges, then it's predominantly harmful because we don't want children near cliff edges. It also is very misleading in thinking that just letting them being on it longer is preparing them for it better. It's not. It's just exposing them to a longer period of harm. And why are we so comfortable with 13 as a cliff edge when we know actually 40% of those users are under 13? We've got 800,000 3 to 5-year-olds using social media independently. So I think the cliff edge argument's weak, and it's not an excuse not to legislate.
No, I think that's totally reasonable. If anything, I was thinking in the other direction. Is 16 too young? Could it go older?
Could I jump in on that? It's an important point, clearly, for parents too, raising children. I think we have to recognise that the developing brain and the difference between childhood and what you might call emerging adulthood, and that the nature of social media being addictive by design, the dopamine hits from likes and constant engagement with, that repetitive engagement with social media is training that childhood brain in an addictive way that I think simply we wouldn't want, which is why we would want to put an age on it. Ultimately, politicians have to decide. Ultimately, there is a line that is drawn and an age that is chosen. 16 seems to be a sensible age. Some of the evidence suggests that's the right age to draw the line, at which children are becoming young adults, and we draw that line in other places, but ultimately it is for Parliament to draw that line. But what we are talking about here is children, and children with developing brains, both as young children but then as adolescents too, where the real harm starts to, I think, from addictive devices develop.
Thanks, Frank.
I would say as well, we've just conducted a survey on 340 health professionals from different specialties, and 34% of them said that 16 they thought was not old enough, in answer to your question. And they felt if this was so harmful for children, childhood goes to 18, and that should be the cut-off. So yeah, 16 can feel a bit arbitrary in the sense of some of the harms. So yeah, it's just to let you know about the outcome of that.
Thank you both.
Parents support the age of 16. So where we have tested the idea of different ages, 13 through to 18, and generally parents settle on 16 as about the right age.
Okay, thanks both. Thanks, Jay.
Emily.
Just before I get to just a quick question there. If we're to use a science-based approach, brain development finishes for women at about 20 and for men at about 25. So are we looking at, are you asking government to consider actually when brain development is reached its maturity?
Yes, but not that old, because that just sounds a bit unachievable and ludicrous. So,
no,
but I totally accept that argument, because it's absolutely right that adolescence moves long into the 20s, doesn't it? And we know that now. That's an established piece of neuroscientific fact. If it's helpful, looking at the 16 cutoff, which is where we seem to be working with, we need to focus on what we already know about that period of time, especially 11 to 16, when, you know, we know as parents children can rely on emotions rather than logic in making their decisions, and it's the time of their they're most emotionally sensitive. Their peer group is the most important thing in their lives. So looking at that period of time, we know as clinicians, parents, police, teachers, that is especially fragile, and that I think is incredibly wise to try to aim to protect children from social media exposure, especially in that age group.
Yeah, but science would tell us 16 for girls, probably later for boys in that stage.
Well, I'll check this with Amy behind.
No, but I do want to get on to my next questions.
Perhaps you could write to us about that.
If you could write to us about
so
there
are studies that have shown, like Amy's longitudinal study, that the most detrimental effect windows are 11 to 13 for girls and 14 to 15 for boys. And massive international studies found that the highest proportion of addictive and problematic social media use, that was they found that was for 23% of 13-year-old girls. That was the highest.
And that coincides with the maturing of the limbic system in the brain, which is the earlier bit of adolescence.
Yeah. It's just it's something interesting for us to pick up in our next inquiry when we're talking about this, because I think, you know, we are the Science and Innovation Tech Committee, so we're really trying to look at evidence.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come back to attitudes. I similarly did a survey of 500 14 to 16-year-olds in Milton Keynes and came up with very similar outcomes in terms of what they're doing. But I went further and found out where these approaches were happening and where they were seeing damaging material. And they weren't what we would consider necessarily social media. So I wanted to talk to you guys about that. So the platforms that they were getting the approaches from strangers, they were seeing the damaging material, were overwhelmingly YouTube and Roblox, which are not considered necessarily within the definition of social media material. Are you suggesting that we ban those? I'm trying to understand better what you mean by a social media ban, how you would define social media.
Yes, and Australia clearly went through this process, and perhaps imperfectly. Once they had decided that they wanted what they called a ban on social media, they then had to discuss, exactly what they meant by social media and which platforms were in and which platforms were out. Often WhatsApp is the most contentious, one of the most contentious platforms, tending to fall outside of the remit of social media. But young people themselves, and I dare say members of Parliament, would recognise the intensity of WhatsApp and the potential for harm and strangers to contact young people through encrypted messages. So I think we would have to go through a process as a country of being really clear and understanding from both parents and young people themselves what are the platforms that are causing them the most harm, causing the most addictive harm. I think clearly platforms like Snapchat, YouTube, need to be within the realms of a social media ban. Messaging services like WhatsApp too.
I had the pleasure of meeting most of the parents of these children in a workshop that we did, and what was really clear, both from the survey that we did of children, was not 14 to 16-year-olds didn't want, they absolutely recognised the harms, didn't want a ban, but did want more regulation. Similarly, with parents, there was this view that a ban, those that felt that social media couldn't be regulated wanted a ban, and those that felt that you could improve their child's online experience wanted to improve their child's online experience. I wanted to see, in your kind of work that you've been doing around your surveys of Parentkind, have you gone on to ask those kinds of questions of what is the preferred option to make the online space safe, or people feeling that that's just not possible, there's no level of online safety that you can have for people under 16?
It is fair to say that there will always be differences of opinions amongst parents as a cohort. They are inevitably a large cohort, so there will always be nuance. However, I think when we speak to parents and when we survey parents, about 2/3, 67%, say they support a full ban on social media. And they say that because it gives them the clarity. It effectively makes you guys the bad guys, not them. It makes and it's the same with things like the age of consent. It gives parents the clarity to say, no, I can't do this. You can't go on access social media because it's just simply against the law. It's not me, it's government, it's Parliament making that decision. And parents, right. I think
right, I can be the bad guy at home with my children and the bad guy here.
I think, dare I say the experience of being a parent is always you're the bad guy, but I think 7 out of 10 parents say that a clear social media ban would make their life easier. It would be easier for them to police social media. I
wanted to just finally pick up Dr. Fuljambe. Rebecca.
Yeah, Rebecca,
all right.
Fine.
Rebecca, I am really interested in some of the pieces of work that you talked about in terms of harms and others. And I guess I wanted your kind of professional view that the harms that this gives not only to people under 16 but over 16, and would you see government intervention in some of the things that you've quite rightly identified, eating disorder material, violent material promoting, that horrific case that you talked about with the puppies, it's just horrific. Do you see that really, would you like the government to be cleaning that up for everyone, some of that material, because of the harm that it can do to post-16s? Similar to what Adam was talking about, that kind of, if it's harmful under 16, is it not harmful to all of us?
Yeah. We can't clean up everyone, can we? But I would like to see the government making a deliberate, proactive move to safeguard children using a law, because people from all backgrounds understand that a ban means a law, and laws fundamentally are there to protect. With regards to when you're looking at addictive uses of these devices, addictive uses of smartphones, addictive use of social media, any psychiatrist we talk to or GP, they all say the same. We are so close to this reaching criteria as a diagnosis of behavioural addiction. Now, that's serious. We can't have hundreds and thousands of our children at very young ages behaviourally addicted to these platforms. Not just the fact they're using them for hours on end, but the content. Gambling is behaviourally addictive and has laws. And I think the government should feel confident and have the freedom to make those parallels, because the way these children have been so collectively pulled onto these platforms in this way is grotesque, really. And I've been a doctor for 25 years, and the changes we have seen since this stuff came in are so far-reaching, I can't list them. The list is too long. And we know that they are it is a significant component of why they are the way they are now. And I am, without doubt, sure that it's a huge part of the mental health crisis we're seeing in them as well. But first and foremost, they're not getting enough sleep. 70% of our children aren't getting enough sleep. So it does require a law to educate and lay down a line to support parents. I think it's just so important. It's a safeguarding responsibility.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily. Daniel.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask whether you believe it is likely that young people would circumvent any such ban. Obviously, it's talked about VPNs and so on, but also this definitional question of simply moving to something else which we haven't prescribed. How risky is that?
I think there is imperfection built into a ban. A ban provides clarity to parents, but clearly there will still be a sort of cat and mouse process going on. The argument really for a ban, I think, for charities like Parentkind and for parents, is that it starts to change the culture. And this is what we're seeing in Australia now, and I think you might hear from witnesses later on. We've spoken to academics from Australia who were part of the process for introducing their social media ban. And what they are principally talking about is changing the culture around social media, so that it is less permissible for children to be on social media, to be active on those platforms, where you have a scenario where social media is now ubiquitous, and almost all teenagers have a smartphone device that allows them access to social media apps. You're starting to change that culture where it becomes less and less acceptable once the Parliament has led that culture change through clarity and law. But I would accept the imperfection.
On that culture question now, I think many of us can remember things that were banned in our youth, and actually banning them actually made them more attractive, not less attractive.
But still did reduce usage.
I think there'll be less of something when Parliament enacts the clarity of a ban. I think if you look at things like seatbelts, wearing seatbelts, for example, in cars, there are often analogies made through previous acts of Parliament. Sure, it might make something for a teenager more enticing, more alluring, but it also helps parents to say, this is simply not allowed. Schools won't allow it anymore. It's not allowed outside of the school gates. There is now a law. It's just something you are not allowed to do. And that is an example of, I think, Parliament leading and changing culture.
And what assessment have you made of alternatives to banning? Because no one could have heard the evidence you've put this morning without being concerned about it. But is a ban the only way? Would there be restrictions that would work, that might achieve the same outcomes that we want to see, which might be more effective?
On behalf of parents, we speak for parents. We support the ban because of the clarity it gives to parents. There are clearly other options presented in the department's consultation, for example, curfews or further regulation around social media. We would be troubled, I think, by those alternatives because they don't give parents in particular, who are ultimately put in the position of policing these things, the clarity they need to do the job that we want them to do.
Just one other, I know there's plenty of questions people want to ask. There clearly are some young people who benefit from accessing social media. Is that your experience? And how would you try and trade off the potential benefits against the harm that you've described? Perhaps Becky first.
No, I wouldn't say the benefits are of huge interest to us at the moment in light of the harms, because the harms are not just small incidences for a few children. It's affecting their sleep, they're showing addictive behaviours, increased in eating disorder symptoms, cruelty to animals, cruelty to each other, sexploitation, violent acts, increased criminalisation of children. You hear teachers, police and doctors incredibly worried that a lot of this has been provoked or directly caused by social media. In that context, I'm less interested in the benefits because there are other ways for children to communicate. And if these companies were just told you can't have access to our children anymore, there may be benefits in this, which we are more than willing to look at if you remove the harms.
You don't see
I'm
any
not
benefits.
interested in the benefits in light of where we are now. No, I find it quite troubling that it's stalling us, because I've got a house full of teenagers. I know how they use social media, and I know the fun that can be had on family WhatsApps, and the WhatsApp probably would escape any restrictions or bans, because if it's shown to be benign and useful to children, that's great. But TikTok and Instagram and the likes are dreadful, and they need to clean up their act. Can I just make one comment on the ban? Sorry, your comment before about children, or were you relating to the fact that when something was banned, we did it more because we were at that thrill-seeking experiment? Yeah, I agree. But I think the law around, for example, smoking and alcohol meant that there are relatively, well now, much fewer children abusing or trouble misusing alcohol and smoking underage than there are misusing social media and smartphones. So bans would, in that sense, a law, are there as a public health message and protection. So I appreciate what you're saying. I think children will circumvent, but I think the majority or many more children will be protected. And then on the VPN, the amendment does have a broad scope to include making VPNs inaccessible to under 18. So I think there are many ways to make it work.
Just back to Frank on that point about whether there are benefits and there will be groups that will be disadvantaged by a ban.
We actually polled parents on this just as much as we asked parents, what are the harms you're seeing, what are your concerns? Only 5% of parents said they felt social media helped their children access support for personal issues, and only 8% mentioned positive influences from social media. So I think that reflects the very low incidence of parents saying actually there are benefits to social media versus perhaps the wider online experience.
I hear about parents, but what about young people themselves?
Well, I think we have to be very careful where we're talking about potentially vulnerable young people, potentially young people who are exploring their sexuality. We have to be clear that we're not proposing to ban the internet or places where young people can receive advice. We need to make sure that those places where they receive advice are either moderated, we remove any sort of Wild West danger to those places, or that they are carefully controlled by groups who have, we would respect as offering good advice. Could I make a... Go on, please.
Yeah, I could explore that further, but I'm conscious we're stretched for time.
we are. Perhaps just very quickly, what is the...
Well, I was just actually going to make a personal point about the culture change. My son goes to school in the fine city of Cambridge, for example, and he goes to a school where they are absolutely clear. There are no smartphones. Children are not allowed to bring smartphones into the school, and that has helped to change the culture around the parent community. And it's a great school in Cambridge.
Every school I go to in Cambridge, so
it's a fine city,
not unique.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Daniel. Just picking up on the point that Daniel made about examples of harmful products and services in the past, and every generation has a new technological challenge or opportunity to meet. And I can remember the controversy, for example, around video gaming a couple of decades ago. So the decision as to whether to ban or to better regulate is a trade-off, together with the benefits that it can bring. You've both, I think, basically said that the harms are so great that there are no benefits. And yet, I think this committee would feel that we certainly need, as adults, through our lives, we need to be able to use social media. Social media is an essential part of so much of society and technology, and we haven't talked really about ChatGPT, even more so in the future. So are you you're absolutely convinced that this is a case of banning, not better regulation? Just answer quickly.
No, I'm not convinced of that. Sorry. We need both. And at the moment, the regulations aren't exercising enough authority to catch these companies at their point of harming the children. So we need to introduce laws that make them increase their level of accountability and responsibility to do that properly. That's
in addition to a ban, though. So
yes, we always need regulations. We always need digital literacy, that sort of thing.
That's great. Sorry, I'm going to ask Frank Young on that.
Yes, and we would agree that a ban would sit within public health messaging too, education support for parents as well. It's never just one thing.
Right. And could I just say one final thing, that it's not that we're saying social media has no benefits at all. There is actually very little robust evidence of its benefits.
There isn't. Okay, thank you. I know that Alison wanted to come in, and then Freddie and Kit. Okay, so and we've got about 5 minutes.
Just very quickly, I'm not really. I am very concerned that we have a lack of definition of social media, and saying that that's a national. When you're looking to put in a ban, when you haven't defined exactly what you're banning, is really concerning to me. And obviously, if you do it by a named platform point of view, that makes you're dealing with a constantly shifting background. So I just want to talk about. Are you talking about user-to-user functionality? So gaming. Would that become under that? ChatGPT, there's huge issues with the use of ChatGPT, and I went to a Parentkind drop-in and session, and there was an example raised there by a colleague where a young girl logged onto a static website which had suicide content on it, and then she was bombarded by emails. And sadly, the story did not end well. So again, this is not defined as social media. So that is one question I really want to pin you down on. The second thing is I am concerned about this, your answer about parenting responsibility, and the state can do that instead of the parents. So 2 very quick questions. A survey said 50% of parents would not comply with this ban, and so you would create an in and out group. Of those that have access and those haven't. Huge issues with bullying there. And also, what's your opinion on parents putting their children on social media, aka, influencers using their children for that purpose? If a child can't access social media, should parents be allowed to put their children on social media?
Okay, all right. Quickly.
There's lots of questions. So just to be very quick, I think on the issue of parents putting their own children onto social media, I mean, clearly, there has to be a freedom for parents to make their own decisions. I might make a different decision to another parent. I think on the point of parents not complying with any ban, I think that data was taken at a point of time where a ban hasn't been enacted, and polling will only ever tell you what people think right now. It is a snapshot. I think once you change the culture around and expectations around social media, you will start to see a change in behaviour. I do think there's plenty of evidence from history of culture change being led by legislative change, and there are plenty of social reforms where that has been demonstrably the case, and I suspect this will be another one.
When you present polling as evidence for a ban, you can't then negate polling as evidence where a ban might not work. I
think anybody though who conducts polling for a living, as a mechanism, will understand the sort of parameters within which it sits, and this applies to voting intention polls, for example, and the same conversation.
Social media definition, can I pin you down? Because this is a huge area. You said you don't want to ban from the internet, but I've given some examples where actually that what would not be classified as social media could be classified as delivering harms. So, social media, what do you mean? How do you see a ban being
Alison, we're going to have to move up. So can you answer that quickly?
So it's more age gating, raising the age for appropriate reasons. So that's the safeguarding positioning, I would say. the technicality of defining what constitutes social media and how does AI fit in, how does gaming fit in, well, it needs a broad scope and a list of definitions so that you can go in and target who is potentially in breach. Those decisions need to be made, but that can be made within the remit of the raise the age. So if it can involve all user-to-user messaging. So that might be through Fortnite, Coldplay, Line of Duty, all those sorts of things, Minecraft, anything where strangers can access our children. That user-to-user definition does actually cross the divide over various AI, gaming, social media platforms. I'm a doctor, so this is out of my lane, but we must be able to figure that out. What we're really saying is that its current format is not safe for children. We're age-gating it, not banning it, like we do gambling, alcohol, smoking, sex. It's very frustrating, this framing. We're spinning round in circles. I just feel we can do it.
Thank you. I know that Freddie and Kit, very quickly.
Just to be very brief, we've spoken very eloquently, Rebecca, on the physical and on the behavioural and mental harms of social media use. I just wonder, as a physician, if you could speak very briefly to any physical harms that children may come to by being on social media. I'm thinking in particular in terms of their eyes, so myopia is a particular high rate in countries where social media and screen use is very high. It's almost 90% in South Korea amongst high school children, but also in terms of physical activity as well. I wonder if you could just speak to that for a minute or so.
Yes, of course. So we have an obesity epidemic in children, which isn't being made better by the fact so many children, especially in deprived backgrounds, are sitting for hours and hours on screens. So we're actually seeing that in clinical practice. Cases of things like an 8-year-old coming in with peripheral edema because they hadn't moved from 12 hours gaming. There's various physical manifestations of children sitting still for hours and hours when they should be moving, and usually they're on screens, so we're seeing that a lot. Eyesight, myopia, short-sightedness is genetic, but the huge increases in rates of short-sightedness, huge meta-analyses have confirmed that this cannot be down to genetics alone. And they've found that for every extra hour of digital screen use, the risk of developing short-sightedness goes up by 20%. So what we're not really joining the dots on here, because we need a public health campaign to educate and support families, is it's not just that these children need glasses. They're at risk of cataracts, glaucoma, retinal detachment. In severe short-sightedness, they're at risk, a long-term risk of losing their sight completely. And then you bring it into where I work, quite a deprived rural environment. Those children very often aren't taken to their eye appointments. They're in out-of-date glasses. They're in chaotic families with low incomes. Often they're out of school. And what are they doing? They're at home just sitting on screens. The impacts on speech and language are profound, and there's very robust evidence coming out on the fact that we have completely lost the language-rich environment in context world that a child must have from birth in order to fully develop their language, and that's been hemorrhaged onto screens that cannot perform that function. I mean, there's more, but
thank you. That's very interesting, and I would suggest if we have, if that has not already been submitted in evidence to the committee, it would be useful for this session, but also for our inquiry into digital devices and childhood. Kit.
It's kind. There's obviously growing or a very significant body of correlative evidence, and that is now translating, as you said, into causal evidence in research. And I just wondered if you can confirm that the reason that 16 is a good age, that in terms of as a doctor, in terms of the brain development, my understanding is there are two key functions that develop in the brain prior to 16. One is this sort of limbic system, which is about emotional response, and particularly peer, a reaction to peer approbation or otherwise, but also the reward system and the response to a kind of dopamine effect develops between kind of 13 and 16 most strongly, albeit, as you said, the development happens afterwards. And that's why that particular age is particularly susceptible to this combination of peer review and a sort of trigger reward Is that your understanding of the
Yes,
science?
that's absolutely spot on. And they are particularly susceptible, which makes it even more tragic that they are being exploited and exposed to these harms at the time when they do the most harm. But to go to your point about the part of their brains that's developing in that period, it's kind of what the child neuroscientists, of which I'm not one, describe as the use it or lose it.
Yeah.
So when they're doing these, whatever they're doing in their environment, this kind of spectrum of activities in their day, they're building and myelinating and strengthening neuro pathways and neurolingual pathways.
Okay.
If they're focused...
I'm just conscious of...
Yeah, sorry.
And I'm pro about... We've all just voted not long ago to ban apes for kids, right? And the argument was well, it'll just make them more attractive, so I get that. Second thing I just wanted to ask is about an emerging area of concern, and whether you'd heard this from parents as well, which is where there's research now emerging around what they call technoference, which is about the interference of these platforms in the relationships between parents and children, and that even to the extent that parental, and we're now talking about a generation who've been through this, who will themselves become parents, that parental obsession with social media is interfering with early attachments with their children, and also that parents of current teenagers, they're finding that the conflict caused by the discussion over social media is causing relationship breakdown. I mean, lots of parents tell me the only source of conflict in their house is screen usage and social media. Now that is pushing that is pushing adolescents more towards their peers online because of this breakdown. Is that an area of concern to parents as well?
It is, and we I mean, there are 2 points here. We have evidence from our polling of parents that it is screen time and it is being on social media that is causing conflict within the family. But I would also say, as somebody who leads a parenting charity, that there is a responsibility on parents too, including myself, to model good behaviour. And I think we also have to leave space within this conversation, particularly those of us who have jobs where we might be on our phones quite a bit, like a member of Parliament, for example, to model that good behaviour. And I think there should be space for saying, that is a responsibility too.
Absolutely. Okay. I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. We're over time, but it's obviously been absolutely fascinating and wide-ranging, not only about social media, but clearly about screen time and other impacts of digital devices. But I'd just like to thank you very much for your evidence this morning, and Frank Young and Dr. Fuljambe, and say order. Order, and welcome to the second panel in today's session on social media and age restrictions. And I'm going to ask the witnesses again to introduce themselves in response to the first question, which is going to be put by Alison.
Welcome and thank you. We've just had a very interesting session talking about why a ban is a good good thing to do. I have some concerns that we're still very diffuse about what our definition of social media is, and also in lack of that defined is what the risks are of a very well-meaning plan to ban under 16s, that there might be unintended consequences and negative impacts. So my question to all of you is, what are the possible negative consequences of a ban on social media for under 16s? Baroness Kidron, I'll go to you first to kick off.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me. And I should just say at the outset that I'm an advisor to the Online Safety Network and chair of the Digital Futures Commission. So I don't want that to go missing. I think I want to just... I was very struck in the last session by the chair saying better regulation or ban. And I think that what I heard in all the questions is the failure of enforcement of the Online Safety Act. And that, I think, is the context in which anything we say. And I also want to say about, while we're talking about definition, that actually it is normal for products to have to be safe to access markets, citizens, and consumers. And so I think we have to be careful about whether we're talking about a ban of children from something or of something, and I do agree with your problem about definition, of something to children. Why are we letting these companies, avaristic, exposing and creating harm, access to our children? Now, having said both of those sort of broader issues, I think that if products are not safe, they should not have access to children. I actually like the questions that other people said about the age up to 18. I think 16 and 17 is a very vulnerable age. It's where you have least supervision, you've got most peer pressure, and indeed you are exploring broadly. But I think the key point that you make there is, what are we banning? Are we going to ban last year's problem, or are we going to start looking at this year's problem? And what the hell are we going to do about that Online Safety Act?
Thank you. Professor Woods.
Yes, I'm Professor Lorna Woods, Professor Emerita at the University of Essex, and as Baroness Kidron indicated, an advisor to the Online Safety Act Network too. I'm a lawyer by training and I love definitions, and I think you're right. The devil is going to be in the detail in terms of scope, because scope affects both effectiveness and side effects of any measure that is taken. So we're not just talking about bans here, but any regulatory regime. The Australian regime, as I understood it, excluded services such as WhatsApp and quite a lot of the gaming. And I think this has an unfortunate effect that in a desire to be proportionate in speech terms, they may have undermined the effectiveness. Because this isn't a question about children going off and having to search the dark web for obscure sites. They're going to where they were already and where the problems already were. So I think there is a real question about definition. We do have one. You've used the language user to user, which is the terminology used in the Online Safety Act, which does focus on functionality, but as you've also remarked, excludes email. I don't think email on its own is a problem, but email as a supportive tool can add to issues.
So to bring you all back to the question is, so you've outlined how difficult it will be to manage the scope and looking at functionality, and even with functionality we can create arguments as to where that goes. But assuming that a ban or a delay, as the Australia call it, comes into action of some sort, even named platforms, for example, as Australia have done, what are the possible negative consequences of that? and how would we, maybe if it happens, how could we mitigate against them? So sorry to interrupt, but I'm conscious of time. So Dr. Sylwander, would you sort of want to pick up on that and people then can jump in?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Dr. Kim Sylwander. I am from the Digital Futures for Children Centre at the London School of Economics. And I come here from the perspective of having worked for a long time with researching children's experiences, their online experiences. I think in terms of, because, and as I'm sure you're all aware, there's a big group of researchers who are not kind of on board with a ban, or what is often called a ban, at the age of 16. And one of the reasons is because there's a risk that we are pushing children to unregulated spaces. So spaces which are easy at hand, but then also, of course, the darker spaces of the internet, rather than spaces that we can regulate more easily. So I think that is one of the crucial kind of arguments to the risk of implementing a ban. But then also, as you say, I think the definition issue is a big issue. So the other issue is that, will it be effective? And essentially today we have a ban for under 13s. And when we look at Ofcom's research, we know that from children aged 10 to 12, still 82% of them somehow access social media. Yeah. So if we implement a ban at 16, will there be anything that says that we won't have the same kind of figures for under 16? So it would introduce some kind of friction. The level at which it would actually protect children, we don't know, because we have very limited evidence on how bans work.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah. I think for me, there is a concern that if you focus on a ban, you lose focus on enforcement of the Online Safety Act. Even if we have concerns about how far it goes, I don't think it's helped by then moving the regulatory focus elsewhere. And I think my preference would be to try and make at least some products safer for all age groups.
You guessed my next question, which was fantastic, and thank you for that one. I just sort of cite some evidence that some 50% of parents said they would not comply with this. So you create another thing of ins and out groups. We have a cliff edge problem that Molly Rose Foundation put forward, and that so that it raises the question that you just raised. That, is there evidence that a ban would prevent other interventions designed to promote safety for all users? And we've had some talking about neurodevelopment up to 21, the impact on women and stuff. This happens at all age ranges. And so in that sense, is there evidence that it could prevent other interventions and making those companies produce safe products? But could a ban actually at least be an intermediate step to making them make those safe products? And I'll come back to you, Baroness Kidron.
I'm sorry to be difficult about the word ban, but I'm going to continue to be difficult about the word ban, because I think if the government don't do something, parents are going to be very, very disappointed. And I really want to make this clear. You heard from a doctor, you heard from a parents group. I have got evidence in front of me that I intend to leave with the committee from the police. I get calls from lawyers, and teachers are incandescent. Yeah, everywhere where the adult world intersects with children, they are crying out for help. And this government, and to a degree the previous government, but this government have failed to enforce and to fill the gaps of the Online Safety Act. Everybody has fallen out of faith with government to do this. So this is the problem. Let's not concentrate on, is the ban the best way? The question is, what do we do now? And I think the consultation is a sort of glaring evidence of government failure, because it doesn't really deal with enforcement. Yeah? So it's actually managing the call for the ban rather than managing the call to make the internet safe for children. And I think this is the problem. So in my view, I have never supported a ban in my life. I have supported it in the Lords. And I will support it again next Wednesday. And the reason, but I hope that we will bring back something that is more conditional, i.e., you may not have access to our children unless A, B, C, or D. And I can give you just one example, is live streaming. Live streaming is on the risk register as a really important risk. It is not in Ofcom's code, which means any company in the world can have kids live streaming with impunity and still be compliant with the Online Safety Act. And last Monday, while the Commons was voting against a ban, I got some evidence from the police about live streaming on TikTok, which makes for such poor reading that my parliamentary assistant said he felt rather sick and could he go home. So what I'm just to conclude, just to make myself utterly clear, is it's not whether a ban is necessary now, it's that something was so necessary and so urgent, if the government is not going to move, but is going to keep on consulting and consulting and consulting, then actually let's do something that actually is not tone deaf and lets parents and doctors and lawyers and police know that you are hearing them.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. I'm going to move on to age verification in a second. I really want to be conscious my colleagues want to get in. I hear what you're saying, but I also hear that there's real issues about whether it's going to be effective and real issues about scope. But you raised this issue about enforcement, which I fully understand. How would you like to see enforcement working, and how, because fines are fine, but when you're dealing with people like Facebook, really quick.
Yes, Alison, we can't go into. We have done a whole inquiry on social media and algorithms.
Yeah.
So we can't.
May I just say,
I was about to say, the social media isn't about about the business models and about the algorithms, but they will factor in fines into their business model, so it doesn't really implement them.
Fines don't work. I'm happy to say that. I'll be very quick, Chair. We have to get rid of the safe harbour, we have to have business disruption measures and injunctions as a first port of call to bring them to the table, and we have to have an individual redress system.
Thank you.
At a minimum.
I'll support the last one, most certainly. I've called for that for many years. Very quickly then, so age requirements. So if we have this ban and we have this age limit, we need to have age verification. Now, I will just mention that in the past life as an academic, I audited IoT's algorithm for age verification, so I understand that, and I'm chair of the Digital ID APBG. So what are the implications of age requirements for privacy and information security online? Is it possible to have age assurance measures that are both robust and privacy preserving? And I would also ask, is there another approach where we could put age verification at the level of the app stores? That might try and simplify the process. I don't know who would like to answer that on age verification.
I'd like to jump in and add some detail to what Baroness Kidron said. In terms of Ofcom and live streaming, it did add, in its consultation on its additional safety measures, some controls around live streaming. So for children, it consulted on whether audience interaction should be limited, but not that live streaming itself should be limited, because they saw the harm coming from strangers interacting with children and giving them gifts and giving them comments.
In the interest of time, age verification.
On age verification, I'm not a technologist, so I'm not going to step beyond my remit there, but to say it should be possible, but I think there's a need for clear standards so that you can allow a more clear line of enforcement. At the moment, Ofcom has come up with principles for highly effective age verification, which seem relevant and legitimate, but they allow wriggle room. So I think if we were referring to international standards which pointed to the privacy and security aspects, then we at least have a baseline for that.
Very briefly, the IEEE have a standard. The ICO is supposed to hold companies to account, but they are not being sent from Ofcom to the ICO, and the ICO are not fully doing it. But the answer to your question is yes, you can have privacy preserving age assurance. Age assurance is not perfect, but it is absolutely possible, and you can double check around the difficult ages of 16, 17 and up to 21 and 2.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm sorry to move us on quickly, but we have so much interest here, and I'm going to go to Lauren next.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. So we just want to ask about the views of children, and how have the views of children influenced your thoughts on where you are at the moment?
You go first, Kim, and I'll come in.
Well, they've absolutely influenced my position on this. And I think maybe coming back to what was discussed in the first panel on the benefits of social media, I think one problem is that we haven't actually adequately studied what the benefits are, because there is a bias in research to looking at the negative, which means that, yes, it's true, we don't have robust evidence to say what are the benefits. But the evidence that we do have, based on surveys with children, but also a lot of qualitative studies, is that especially for vulnerable groups of children, even though they are the most exposed to harms online, they are also the ones that report that they have the most benefits of social media, accessing friends that they might not otherwise, groups where they feel safe, finding information that perhaps, for example, their parents don't let them look for. So social media are important spaces. So regardless of what we think about the negative impacts, these are realities for many children, and they want to keep that. So in our consultations with children around the world, but also all over the UK, what we hear again and again is that they want to be online, first of all, and they want the benefits of social media, but they don't want the harms. They want us to regulate away the harms. So kind of to build on what Baroness Kidron was saying, why, if we know what the harms are, if we know what the features that are harmful are, why don't we remove them for everyone? Why are we saying, and I think a previous speaker was saying, would we accept it for ourselves? Well, we shouldn't for adults either. So I think we need to look at what's age appropriate for children, definitely, but we also need to see how can we remove the harms that we know are there.
And just to, and then I'll come to you, Baroness. Those children that you mentioned that are most likely to experience those harms, will they be in favour, do you think, of a ban and preventing them from that space?
Yeah, so if we take, for example, the Australian setting, there were a lot of child and youth groups that came forward and said no, actually. So LGBTQIA plus groups, for example, minority youth, that came forward and said we are not in favor of a ban because we are afraid that our safe spaces online that they've established through social media will be kind of dismantled. They won't have access to them. And again, regardless of what the risks may be, these are realities that children are facing, and they want those safe spaces. So we also have to ask ourselves, how can we create spaces that are safe for children, that offer them these spaces that are not commercially driven?
Right. So then going to regulation, but on you go.
So over the last 15 years, I've done so many workshops with children. I do them absolutely regularly, and I love doing them. And I'm always surprised that whether they're in Pakistan or Kenya or America or here, how similar their concerns are, because they're using the same products. So I think I would just say very briefly two things. I would agree with Kim. Children want to be online, but they want it to be safer, kinder, and less intrusive and demanding. Repeatedly, they say as well, if their friends were off, they would be more comfortable being off. So I think you have to be very careful about just hearing they want to be on, because you also have to hear that they would prefer to meet in real life, but don't feel they have that option. And then maybe, worth saying that the age-appropriate design code, which was the first piece of legislation, and if that had been properly and robustly enforced, was entirely based. 13 of its 15 standards came out of the mouths of children, and that was about data privacy, and I can tell you the name of every child who, you know, behind each thing. And I think that I'm sorry to bleat, but let's not keep on passing laws if we're not going to implement them. Let's implement forcefully and simply the ones that we have.
Mm-hmm. So that leads me very beautifully on to what are the gaps that we currently exist in that regulation space. I did have a point, but I've just forgotten it, but I will come back around to it. So where are the current gaps in regulation and enforcement to make it safe?
Well, I mean, you know, we are sitting here talking about a social media ban, and chat bots and friendship bots are the new emerging harm. And I just find it very, very hard that minister after minister comes to the dispatch box and say, we can't anticipate. Yeah? Thank you for your humour. I appreciate it. We can't anticipate. But meanwhile, I will say this, and I am furious about this, that the government had a 3-line whip last Monday preventing risk assessing for AI child sexual abuse on generative AI. And I think that is shocking. I think it's shameful. And I think even though we lost the vote because of the 3-line whip, the government should do something about that. So what I would say is safe harbour, duty of care, be broader and simpler, and let's get all of these things within the remit, and let's have proper powers of enforcement. And really this issue about privacy and data is the root of everything. Because actually the reason that they're bugging kids is because they want their attention, they want their data. So if you go to kids' privacy, then some of the things about content just fall away. And some of the things about addiction. And finally from me, I will say we did think during the Online Safety Bill that we had got provisions around addiction. The Lancet commission upon which I sat is about to publish around problematic internet use, and I think you will find that is evidence that you might like to use. But I really would urge the committee to understand that actually it's the behavioural problem that is the source of everything, and most of the problems of the internet can actually be done by switching off the intense demand rather than the content itself.
Thank you very much. I just want to make the point here that the committee, as part of its report into social media and algorithms, did issue a number of recommendations which included addressing some of the behavioural issues through the algorithms, through advertising, through incentives. The government did not accept our recommendations, but the Secretary of State has said that she will be taking another look at them, and hopefully, we will certainly continue to press for their implementation.
Excellent.
Yeah. Right. Just to kind of finally say, it feels like we want simple solutions. And I think, as been raised before, what do you define it as? I spoke to some children in my patch, and they were saying, like, who's on Roblox? Who's heard something nasty being said on Roblox? Lots of hands going up. Who doesn't want that anymore? Yeah. So, and it comes back down to the intent of which some of these things have been designed for. If the owner and designer of Roblox won't let his children alleged play on Roblox, then there's an issue here. So there's something about what you said about the intent and the behavioural intent of these programs.
I think there is, and I understand this is a quick look at the ban problem, but we do have software is a product. Yeah, software is a product.
It is their choice.
Why is it that something that is deliberately designed to optimise for certain outcomes is not subject to the law in an appropriate way? And I think that is where we have to go ultimately. But coming back to the chair's point, it's better regulation. Is a ban on the way to better regulation? I don't know if it is, but I do think that if the government consultation has not dealt with enforcement, with chatbots, with AI, with all these other things, then a ban will be useless. If a ban is simply, as Rebecca said in the last session, a raising of the age for certain features, fine. But I think concentrating only on social media is a mistake, and it should be about services that children use.
Yeah. Okay. If I can interject, the bubbling under this is the idea of product safety and safety by design.
Yes.
Yeah.
There is a reference in the Online Safety Act to products being safe by design, Section 1.3, and that was the work of the Lords. Unfortunately, there's not a clear definition in there, and I think that maybe putting down some principles at least as to what we mean by safe by design might be helpful. Yeah. And I had a look at some of the other areas which require product safety, and the first principle is designed to reduce the existence of the hazard in the first place. And it's only when you've exhausted that as a possibility that you then go on to mitigating and managing. And remediation is the last stage. So you have got a range of ways of tackling the problem, but there's a hierarchy.
And I think Emily has a question relevant to that.
And I absolutely, I think you've hit a really good, important point, what we mean by safety by design. And myself and my colleague, Tom Collins, who is a former BSI official, are doing additional work in that area, because there should be a set of standards really about what that is. And BSI, who you guys know I talk about a lot because they're based in my constituency, but also because I think they're amazing. Because I think some of this is about, But I do want to talk about other solutions that have been proposed, not in isolation, but as part of the way of making the online sphere safer for children, but also safer for adults. One of the proposed solutions is basically quite an old solution, which is to use ratings like the BBFC ratings, or for apps, the video game ratings that are known and understood by parents, children and adults alike across this country. Can I get a bit of a reaction from all of you about whether you think this could be part of the solution in terms of making sure content is appropriate for the audiences, or apps are appropriate for the audiences that are currently consuming them? Kim, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. So kind of every time I meet social media companies especially, I'm struck by that they are the ones who are self-assessing their own risks, and they always find themselves to be low risk, surprisingly. Which, and I think, so your example of the BBFC it is a good example. So there we have a system through which we also kind of risks are assessed, age appropriateness is assessed, and then also there's periodic consultation and review with the public. So to say how can we make sure that we're kind of sticking to the times and understanding culture as it is now, not as it was 20 years ago. So I think there is a point to that model, and how it could be applied in this case, I think is definitely something that needs to be considered, because I think, again, we shouldn't leave it to companies to decide whether they are compliant or not. It needs to come from government. It also, when it comes to the best interests of the child, that is language that is co-opted by big tech companies, and they feel that they are acting in the best interest of children, but it's not up to them to decide whether they are or not. So yes, I would say such a model is definitely interesting.
YouTube, I've asked YouTube repeatedly what the rating is for YouTube Kids.
Yes.
Right. I just want to know, is it appropriate for a 5-year-old? Is it appropriate for a 10-year-old? Is it appropriate for a 13-year-old or a 16-year-old? I don't know. And they don't seem to know either, which is a bit of a concern and worry when we're talking about potentially creating safe places for children. Yeah. YouTube Kids is one that parents trust in that sense. They say, okay, I'll let my child only watch that, and that will be protected. Beyond YouTube Kids and other apps that most major social media companies and online companies are developing in terms of these children-only spaces, how would you assess things like the addictiveness or the feeding of an algorithm, one that generates for you what should be your next choice versus maybe it's old school, picking your own next video to watch from a selection, and things like in-app purchases, product placement, things where we have quite strict rules around what would be appropriate for that on streaming platforms and on television at the moment.
Well, I definitely think that they need to be considered from an age perspective and from a developmental perspective. So personalized feeds, for example, there is just no need for them to be, also considering that they're connected to commercial interests. Having that aimed at children is just kind of nonsensical, and we know that captures attention and keeps their attention focused and keeps them locked in. So I definitely think that those are risks that need to be age assessed, and that for children, and I mean children under 18, they need to be limited.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, the bottom line is anyone looking for a silver bullet should stop looking. Yeah. And obviously it's very helpful to parents to have, this is for 12, this is for 11, this is for 17, But I absolutely agree with Kim that it can't be content-based, it has to be based on the experience. Yeah. And the biggest part of the experience is how compulsive, exposing, and so on. Yeah. So a tool in the tool shed. I'm very much more interested in some of the standardization issues that you put forward, and I think there are a lot of things that we could standardize. That some cigarettes are stronger than others. Where the bar is, I don't know, but I do know the difference. I'm not a smoker, but you can tell on the packet. So I think there is something in there. But I think that the point that Kim made there about we've got to stop treating tech as if it was a responsible adult, or let me put it more strongly, responsible parent to our children. Because it's not. And again, I'm going to go back to the age-appropriate design code and say YouTube turned off autoplay as a result of the age-appropriate design code for children. It did a number of very, very important things at the time, but we did not see the regulator go in and say, that is our bottom line, that is our except they let everybody do their own thing.
Right. So I wanted to just raise because I think it's really important, sorry Lorna, because you introduced me to the parents of a young man the other week who had lost taken his own life after being addicted to a companion bot. This is something that hasn't really hit the UK in quite the same way as hit the US, but it is here, and we need to be absolutely aware of it. And this is it's a wider question about future-proofing, because companion bots, for those on the committee that might not know, are these bots that become your best friends, and they are sycophantic, and the most important thing that they do is keep you online because they're collecting your data. To do so, they cut you off from everyone else. And they use all the phrases we understand with coercive control and grooming. So when it comes to a technology that is as corrosive as that, is there any amount of regulation that could stop that from being damaging? Or is that an area that you would like the consultation to consider, saying absolutely not for under 18s or whatever it might be?
Well, let me briefly say that we have an amendment to stop it in the Lords next Wednesday, and I would like the government not to wait for a consultation. And you say it's coming to the UK, but I have parents in touch with me who are worried about their children, right? So I think that is an emergency. And I think that some of the things, and Lorna's done more work on this, but some of the things that we are talking about about future-proofing the Online Safety Act and also broadening, raising the age across products that are unsuitable, those two things would really help us. Now, we can't keep consulting. It took 8 years to do the Online Safety Act. It's taken another 2 years to bring forward its codes. We cannot afford to wait. So some of the future-proofing is about being bold and saying, actually, we know that sycophancy and it is not healthy for anyone, but we will not allow it for children. They are parenting our children, and I think that's the intervention.
Okay, I'm going to move on now.
Brave saying sycophancy to a bunch of MPs.
I'm going to move on. We're going to move on now to because we're running out of time. But I'll just my humour earlier, Baroness Kidron, when you talked about not anticipating future harms. All these harms have been anticipated, and I speak as obviously I work for the regulator Ofcom before coming into Parliament. They have been anticipated. They can be anticipated. The point Emily makes is that they are being anticipated, and government action can be preemptive rather than waiting for the market to address a failing that it does not address.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Good morning, all. I want to come to the debate between the idea of a social media ban versus raising the digital age of consent as sort of two options that we might be looking at the moment. And I was wondering as to your thoughts about how you think, in practical terms, there might be a difference between introducing a ban, as it were, versus raising the digital age of consent. Lorna, maybe.
I think it depends what you mean by a ban. Baroness Kidron has said, we probably need to be a bit more precise, and I think that's right. We could say something like, let's require companies to enforce their current minimum ages, is one form of an age restriction. We can put a minimum age in ourselves through legislation, or we could just say, let's take this product off the market until it's proven safe, or let's just take this off the market. So I think, there's a range of options there.
Sure. I mean, what are your thoughts, though, about this idea of changing the digital age of consent? I understand it's currently 13. That could be moved to 16. That might be, on paper, different from a ban, but what would that look like practically?
Well, I'm not sure what people mean when they say raising the age of digital consent, because it's usually related to data protection and the ability to consent to the processing of your data. So in a way, it's coming from a different regime and addressing a slightly different problem. So you may end up having one measure around minimum ages that does multiple things then, that you could use it to say this is about the consent for data protection purposes, this is also about your access to particular services. So you could use it as a multi-purpose tool, I suppose.
Okay, thanks, Lorna. Baroness Kidron, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I think, Lorna's absolutely right that those two ideas come from different regimes. I think what people who are saying raise the digital age of consent possibly are trying to grasp at is that they don't feel that the current system is protecting children for long enough. But I think you've heard evidence before, and I've got lots of evidence here, that under 13s are not protected either. So I think that if the data regime is not working properly because it's not being enforced, and the online safety regime is not being enforced properly because we've still got all these problems, and the terms and conditions of the companies are not being properly enforced, what we have is an enforcement issue. Where I like the conceptual thought of raising the age is we're saying what is suitable at what age. And I will say one thing, that in the Online Safety Act, it does talk about evolving capacities, it does talk about different ages and stages, and it is Ofcom who decided to do 18 or under nothing else. So we do actually have in law already the opportunity to consider as a society what we think is suitable at different ages and stages, and not just about content, but about the experience. And that's where I'd like to see us going.
Okay, thank you. I mean, on that point, I talked to the previous panel about, we talked about the age specifically, and we said, let's accept that 16 is a quote-unquote good age for us to bring in this threshold if we decide that we wish to. But there are some concerns from some, maybe not from others, about the potential for a cliff edge, 16 versus 17 years of age. My understanding is that those cliff edge concerns are often tagged onto a ban, but maybe not onto the digital age of consent. I wonder if you've got thoughts on why, Lorna, why you think those concerns are in one space and not in another.
I'm not entirely sure, because if you are using digital age of consent as a threshold condition, then you've got a threshold, haven't you? I think the underlying point is, why have we created a cliff in the first place rather than an age-appropriate slope, if I can say that. And I think we need to look at standards for adults as well. I don't accept that adults are bulletproof. So I think if we have a generally better environment against which you then sit higher protections for children, you are also reducing this big difference in standards, potentially.
I think that's a really important point. We as MPs, it's common knowledge we get a lot of online abuse, and we're certainly, my own experience, I'm certainly not immune from the effects that we're talking about today. So I think the point is very valid. But thank you all very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Adam. We are running out of time. I do just want to ask one last question about children's rights. I mean, we talked about the child's perspective, but I sit on the, I've guested on the joint committee on human rights between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, which is conducting an inquiry into AI and its impact on human rights. Of the children's, the UN General Convention on the Rights of the Child includes rights such as access to information, freedom of expression, also the right to privacy. Just briefly then, for an important question, what impact do you see an outright ban having on children's rights? Is that a matter of concern for any of you? Who would like to respond on that?
Can I, as the human rights lawyer, have a little go? Sorry.
No, you go first.
Just to say, there obviously is an impact on freedom of expression, whether you look at the European Convention, the ICCPR or the UNCRC. There's an unseen problem, though, with the justification. We all know freedom of expression is a qualified right, and interferences can be justified on the basis of a legitimate interest, where it is based on the law and where it is proportionate. Right. Okay. Now, I think the Australians drew the scope of their regime with a concern for for going too far in terms of cutting out all forms of communication. Right. There is another danger, which is if you have a regime which interferes with speech but is ineffective in its aim, then it too is disproportionate. So you can run into problems of, in a way, not going far enough.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Baroness Kidron.
I had the privilege of chairing the drafting group of General Comment 25, which explained the relevance of the convention to the digital world. Right. And Kim will talk more about it, but I would just like to draw to the committee's attention the freedom of thought. That is the ultimate freedom for a child. And if you are being nudged this way and that way, you are not free in your behaviour, you're not free in your thought. And I would just challenge the idea that social media is the only way to get information. The digital world is far broader. And I really just, in my last sentence to the committee, would like to just say, you know, people are desperate out there. Parents are desperate. Kids are desperate. There were 7 hours of programming at LBC on online harms on Monday, and not one person rang in and said, let it be. We need to deal with this.
Thank you very much, Baroness Kidron. You've made that point very clearly through this session, but also thank you very much to Professor Lorna Woods and Dr. Kim Sylwander for your evidence and for joining us this morning. You've given the committee a lot to think about. Order. Now we come to our third set of witnesses in today's session exploring social media restrictions, and we are looking at restrictions in Australia, how they are being evaluated, and to get an overview of the research evidence. We're especially grateful to Jeff, who has travelled from the United States, and to Julie, who is joining us virtually from Australia. Very late in the evening, and also, of course, to Professor Auburn. I'll ask the members to introduce themselves in response to the first question, which I will actually put to Julie Iman-Grant. Can you just give us an overview of how successful the delay to social media access in Australia, as the terminology in Australia is, how successful that has been so far?
Well, I would say that it's been very successful in its early days. We have about 2.5 million 8 to 15-year-olds. And within the first 2 days, we had 4.7 million social media accounts of under 16s deactivated or restricted, depending on how the platform was configured. What I would call...
Could you just introduce yourself?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Julie Inman-Grant, E-Safety Commissioner.
In Australia, for Australia. Yes.
Of Australia.
And you said that you had how many accounts were deactivated?
4.7 million within the first 2 days, based on the legal notices provided to us.
Right.
All of this is going to be contextual, you'd understand, Chair. So we're now in the second phase of the process, which is probably one of the more difficult phases. And this is where the platforms that are covered by the social media delay need to prevent circumvention, either through spoofing of their age assurance systems or through other forms of circumvention, such as VPNs. So they are responsible for preventing that circumvention. And of course, like any age restriction or limit, whether it's alcohol or smoking or vaping or driving in speed limits, there are people, particularly creative teenagers, that are definitely doing a good job at getting around these. But again, the burden is on the platforms to keep under 16s off the social media sites that are covered. So we're going well. Some companies are doing better than others in terms of, I'd say, compliance and getting the preponderance of under 16s on there. But we're using a layered notice process and high-level talks with their different technical teams to make sure that their age inference tools are replicating throughout the system and that they are implementing particularly the third-party age assurance technologies effectively.
Thank you very much. Freddie.
Thank you, Chair. And
so this is, could the members introduce themselves? Because I'm not sure the Commissioner can see.
So my name is Freddie Van Mill. I'm the MP for Hetley and Tame in Oxfordshire. And thank you, Julia, for joining us at this time. I think it's around 10 o'clock where you are, so I really appreciate your joining us. I do want to come on to, in a moment, your view of what the benefits of this delay or ban in Australia is. But I did read in the brief we had beforehand that you were previously working at Twitter, now X, and it's now your job to protect Australians online. So what do you think they need protecting from, given your experience working in social media?
Right. Well, I did work in the technology sector for 22 years, only 2 years at Twitter when it was under different ownership. I mean, there are a range of harms, and we have a pretty sophisticated research and evaluation team that is working with both Professors Hancock and Orban on building that evidence base. Our recent for online found that 70% of young people encountered various harms on social media. Obviously across the broader internet on gaming and messaging platforms. We also have 4 complaint schemes that you would have read about in the submission that I put forward to you. So we take cyberbullying reports from children, and we have for almost the past 11 years. So we have a lot of data in terms of how that's manifesting and changing. We have an image-based abuse scheme where we have a 98% success rate in terms of removing intimate images that are shared online without consent. That includes deepfake image-based abuse as well. And then we are the hotline like IWF is. So we collect child sexual abuse material, reports, pro-terror content, and then adult cyber abuse. So the threat surface is changing. So, in my first 8 or 9 years, we saw image-based abuse, we saw cyberbullying, obviously child sexual exploitation and grooming. What we've seen increase is about a 1,300% increase in sexual extortion reports, and that's largely targeting young men between the ages of 16 and 24. We're also seeing young people encountering a lot more online hate, a lot more misogynist content. We're doing a lot of work around being a young man online and what they're experiencing with the manosphere. And we're also seeing more things like violent fight videos. So the threat surface is changing, but unfortunately, the harms that have been there for the past 30 years that there's been an internet continue to thrive, sadly.
Thank you for that. And the harms you've identified there are really wide-ranging. So I'm really interested to know what is the regulatory and legal framework you have in Australia and kind of the firepower that your office has that enables you to both enforce this delay but also protect sort of Australians online more widely?
Right. Well, what I would say, and this was echoed in the last panel, we do refer to it as a social media delay because it isn't an absolute ban. It's not an internet block of social media sites, and it also has exclusions for messaging and gaming platforms. And a primary reason for that is because some of our prior research showed that particularly vulnerable communities like LGBTQI+ or First Nations or those with a disability, young people felt more themselves online than they did in the real world, and we didn't want to cut off their digital lifelines effectively or prevent them from creating and exploring like the broader internet. Um, and the other reason we call it a delay is because really what we're trying to do is to prevent young people who are just forming their identity and their personalities and their impulse control and their critical reasoning skills, to prevent them from encountering the harmful and deceptive design features that we all know about, whether it's snap streaks or endless scroll or algorithms and the like. The delay also comports with the way that parents speak to their kids about technology. We don't say to our kids, you're never going to have a smartphone or be online. We say, no, you'll be on social media someday, but when you're ready, and the government says that the age is 16, so you won't be excluded because this will apply to all of your friends. So the last thing I would say there is I do think we need to flip this script from saying that we're trying to prevent children from accessing technology. We're really trying to prevent social media companies that have become quite predatory from accessing our children. So I just wanted to get that framing in there for you. And because I went off script, I forgot your question.
Well, thank you. No, I mean, you've answered it, I think, in part, which is around kind of the regulatory and legal framework that you're working within. I think one of the things we heard in the previous panels was around the fact that we do have some regulations in the UK in the Online Safety Act, but we struggle to enforce them. And Ofcom, our regulator, have faced a lot of criticism in recent weeks around their enforcement of that act. Could you give us an idea of kind of both the regulations that you have that enable you to do your job, but also maybe the size of your office and kind of just the firepower that you have as a commissioner to enforce the rules?
Sure. Well, let me start by saying that technical regulation, when you're looking at something like this is technical regulation meets social regulation, and which is very, very complex. And you're dealing with some of the most powerful and richest entities in the world that will gladly use jurisdictional arbitrage and deep pockets and expensive lawyers to get around compliance. I've experienced quite a bit of that. But our Online Safety Act we were established in July 2015. We started with 30 people and we have expanded about tenfold to close to 300. We're still much smaller than Ofcom, but what I would say is we take a holistic approach, and I would say that no one solution, including the social media delay, is a panacea. So we've got the complaint schemes, and we've built quite a robust set of prevention and education initiatives that are all evidence-based over time and code-designed with the different communities that we're working with. And that's really important to arm parents, carers, children, women who might be experiencing technology-facilitated abuse, whether it's online harassment because they're in the public eye, or whether it's technology-facilitated abuse as an extension of domestic and family violence. So we've got the complaint schemes, which are very effective for providing really immediate or short-term harms remediation. Now, our systemic powers have been rolled out gradually. We have a co-regulatory code scheme, which means that the industry writes them, but we don't allow them to mark their own homework. They have to meet appropriate community safeguards. If they do, I register them. If they do not, then I move to a standard. So we've had some unlawful standards in since June of last year, and we've used it to good effect against blocking nudifying sites, some of the most popular ones that were contributing to deepfake image-based abuse. We've used them against chat roulette sites, including Omi TV based in Portugal, and we've used our App Store code. And Apple, as a result, has deplatformed more than 100 chat roulette sites, which pair predators with children through video chat. So we're using different gatekeeper services as well. We now have search engines have to blur pornography or explicit violence when someone is searching in a logged out state, or to refer people who are looking for explicit instructions in suicide are sent down to us helpline rather than a rabbit hole. I would also say this week we've just deployed our age restricted harmful codes. These also apply to AI companions and chatbots. So no AI chatbot or companion company can serve suicidal ideation, self-harm, disordered eating, violent, explicit content, or any sexually explicit content to an under 18. But this again applies up and down the stack. So what I would say is our codes are much broader. They cover everything from porn sites to gaming sites to search engines to devices to app stores, and also generative AI services. And then we've got transparency powers and what I would call our proactive and systemic change. So the safety by design work and the initiative we developed in 2018 is moving from strength to strength. And we do technology future casting. And this is how we're able to kind of stay ahead of the technology curve in terms of getting these regulatory provisions in before something becomes catastrophic harm.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Kit?
Oh, no, I didn't have a question. Apologies.
Okay. In which case, I will ask whether or not you considered other methods of rolling out or testing the impacts of a ban, such as sequential rollout. No, sorry, rather, did you look at other methods of testing the impact of the delay, such as sequential rollout?
Well, it isn't really a sequential rollout. What we tried to do in our regulatory guidance is break down their various responsibilities. The sequence certainly was in what you need to do first off is identify the under 16s and deactivate the ones that you're aware of now. And then again, we're continuing to measure their progress. One thing that I did do, and we've reserved the right to update our regulatory guidance, is we used our transparency powers, but also a youth survey where we worked with young people and parents to assess the baseline numbers. And as I'd heard someone say in the last panel, they weren't even enforcing their policies that they already have in place of 13-year-olds. We assessed that 84% of 8 to 12-year-olds already had access to a social media site by in at least one in 2024. So it was worse than just trying to target the 13 to 16s. I had to be explicit that it had to be everyone under the age of 16. We gave them a waterfall approach. So we said you can't just use one technology. You need to use, if you're using age inference technologies, you need to supplement that with some form of age assurance. And there needs to be triggers. So whether it's asking for privacy preserving ID, using another form of age assurance like connecting anonymously to banks and constantly improving. I decided not to pick winners and losers. We tested about 60 age assurance technologies, many of which are UK based, and the ACCS from the UK ran that set of tests for the Australian government and found that these technologies are effective, robust, can be accurate and privacy preserving. But I didn't also specifically delineate accuracy rates for them. I wanted to give the companies the opportunity because they know their user base better and their technology infrastructure to implement the solutions. So this is an outcomes-focused approach. But if this isn't successful, then we'll be more prescriptive.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting comparing your approach with Ofcom. Now I want to bring in Professor Hancock and Professor Orban to give their views on whether they're confident they will be able to establish the cause and effect in terms of evaluating the ban. So I'll start with Professor Hancock. And could you introduce yourself and as you get over your jet lag?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Professor Jeff Hancock. I'm a professor at Stanford University, where I'm also the founding director of the Stanford Social Media Lab. I'm working with the Commissioner and her e-safety team to evaluate the SMMA, or the SMA, as I've learned the Australians call it. And one of the great things I think about the legislation there and the e-safety focus has been on evidence. So we're designing a very robust evaluation where we are looking at how young people and family, including parents, experience the delay. So we started a survey that took place before, so we have some baseline. And we will be then continuing 5 additional waves where we'll be doing the same kind of survey so we can look at changes over time for the children's experience around whether they're adhering with the legislation. We'll be looking at their digital experiences. Are they changing their behavior around digital experiences? Does this then affect the outcomes that people are interested in? For example, anxiety, depression, and exposure to harms. And then ultimately, family conflict. As we heard in previous panels, this is one of the central concerns, is every family raises this as one of the main conflicts. And as the Baroness mentioned before, almost all other adults that interface with kids are concerned about this, this issue. So we'll be assessing all of those from top to bottom, and we've articulated a theory of change, which looks at some of the perceptual aspects. What do people think about these bans? What are the other parents thinking? So these norms, which will then potentially change behavior, and then ultimately, does it lead to different kinds of intended and unintended consequences? And I think one thing the Commissioner made clear to us is that she's interested in understanding both those intended consequences, getting the kids back out onto the footy fields, as the Australians also say, but also unintended consequences. Is this problematic for some of the young people or their families? So that's hopefully a sketch of the kind of evaluation we're doing, Chair.
Just to clarify, in terms of how you're identifying the young people that you're going to be observing or watching, or...
Yes, thank you. We're working with the Survey Research Centre in Australia, which is, I would say, their most elite survey institute. And so they've a sample of about 4,121, approximately, children and their parents. And we'll be following those children and their parents for the next several years.
Thank you. And Professor Orban?
I don't have anything to add beyond that on the ban evaluation. I think Jeff has summarised that well. And I'm just an advisor, so it's Jeff who's been leading it.
You're an advisor to the... Just introduce yourself.
To the yes. So I'm Professor Orban. I'm a research professor at the University of Cambridge. I lead one of the UK's sort of most impactful teams researching social media and its impact on young people. Was director of the DCIT Commission on sort of how to improve research in this evidence space, and I'm leading the trial up in Bradford where we're looking at social media curfews.
Great. So very impressive backgrounds all around. And now we'll go to Lauren.
Lovely, thank you. So just one about learning from other countries, really. So in your work, obviously, in Australia and the delay, social media delay, not the ban, what other countries are also looking at this sort of style of restricting youngsters to social media?
Yeah, this is the conversation taking place around the world now, and I think the Australian law has really triggered a lot of these conversations. There are at least 14 countries now that we're tracking that are interested in this. I'm meeting here today with you all to provide evidence, but I'll be meeting later with the French, spoken to the Canadians, Irish, those in Norway, Indonesia. Many of them have reached out because there is an interest in how do we do an evidence-based approach, how do we evaluate these from right off the bat.
Well, and I think It's interesting to note why there is such a focus on evidence, because actually we don't have that much evidence yet about the effectivity of what a ban might look like. And so I think it's very interesting to note how much the evidence has been part of this debate, and I think it's something that has struck me over the last couple of months.
Do you feel like the tech companies are forthcoming in helping supply evidence?
I would say my view has changed on that over the years. I in the past, had done research with Facebook when it was called that before as an independent academic. But I think now that's just changed. I don't really see them as reliable partners anymore. And I believe that's one of the reasons why things like these legislations, which sometimes can be blunt instruments, very blunt, but why I think we're seeing increased calls for them, because I believe that parents in particular feel that they just cannot rely on the platforms to be reliable partners anymore.
And it's very interesting framing it, social media companies from accessing our children and they are not a responsible parent. Over to the screen, beaming straight over to Australia. How important do you think it is to have a coordinated international approach to online and specifically social media regulation?
Oh, we can't hear.
Oh.
Sorry. So technical interruption.
Oh no.
Yes, you can hear.
Sorry.
Could you hear me?
That's a pretty clever thing. I wish I had that regulatory tool. Just mute them all.
Did you hear the question, Julie?
How important do I think international collaboration is? It is essential. I mean, again, we're talking about regulating some of the most powerful companies in the world. And just being a small middle power in the South Pacific, I do think we can have some impact, and we can, have them comply with our safety laws. But there is being the only online safety regulator for the first 7 years, and then having Ofcom and the Irish and the European Commission and Fiji and Singapore and others come on board has been amazing. And you might know that we started the Global Online Safety Regulators Network with the UK, Ireland, and Fiji in 2022. And that has been growing from strength to strength. And what my hope is that we'll have regulatory coherence for countries that decide to follow this path. Again, we're going first, and one of the reasons that we wanted to engage in such a comprehensive evaluation is not only to evaluate this for ourselves, but to develop an evidence base that didn't exist when our policymakers made some of these determinations. So, a common question is 16 the right age, or should it be 18 or 15 or 13? A lot of the policymakers who developed this were avid readers of Jonathan Haidt's An Anxious Generation, and in that book, I will defer to the other research scientists in the room, but that's one of the things that we can look at. I do think it'll be challenging if there is a patchwork of ages around the globe. It'll be hard for the companies to comply. In fairness to them, I will say, because they've been testing out their technologies, including their age inference systems, on those 13 and under and those 18 and over, and the different levels of adolescent maturation during that 13 to 15 year period, it's going to take a while for their classifiers to really catch up and to be perfectly accurate. A lot of the age assurance technologies, particularly coming out of the UK, are getting more accurate, but that's why we need a multiple layered approach.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go to Adam now.
Thanks, Chair. And Adam Thompson, Member of Parliament for Erewash. Good to see you all this morning. Question for Jeff and Amy predominantly on this. Amy, we're just talking about evidence generally and how it's sometimes hard to find the evidence, sometimes it's not very forthcoming. In your experience, both of you, how strong is the evidence for social media's impact on under 16s, positive impact or negative impact?
It's the killer question. So I think we need to think about many different types of evidence. It's almost impossible it's like asking what's the impact of online life, and it's so diverse. And so I think what helps me try to understand this complex system is first thinking about that we can think about harms or benefits on an individual level versus on a population level. So on an individual level, we've seen very strong evidence of harms. We've also, I think, seen strong evidence of benefits. Children's using specific types of social media to, for example, organize social change, protests in their schools, or kind of working together to build communities that they care about. But we've also seen severe harm that I think in other products would be enough to change or recall that product, right? So if a toy has killed 4 children, you would request a recall. You wouldn't really care about, well, how much time does spending time playing with this toy relate to the well-being of the larger population of children? But we also need to think of that population level evidence where we average everything together, because the question here is not about are we banning that specific toy, but are we banning like all toys, or how do we go about with weighing up those risks and benefits? And on the population level, that's where things get a bit harder often, because we don't have the right access to data from companies. This is something that Ofcom did write a report on the Online Safety Act. We've seen just delays in getting that actually into practice. So there, for example, I think it's then, do you talk about polarization? Do you talk about mental health? Do you talk about eyesight? And it's very varied, but I think that's where things are a bit poorer. Yeah. And especially when you think about a ban will manipulate time spent online. And we know time spent online is a really bad measure of impact. It's probably what you see, what it displaces, how you interact with people. But the ban is quite crude because the lever is time. And there we see that the evidence is even more mixed. So I think harms naturally exist, and I think we need change. I think the question is sort of on what level and what areas to be able to weigh up what I see this question being is not a question about where's the evidence or not, but about what philosophers of science would call inferential risk. What's the risk of acting now on incomplete evidence, and what is the risk of waiting when potential harms might accumulate in the meantime? Yeah. But also, what's the risk of doing or putting in place a policy that is less evidence than in other forms of, policy making?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amy. I was actually going to ask some follow-ups, but you covered them off in the thing. But just one thing I was curious about. For the record, obviously, I assume that your background here is academic journal papers, etc. But where's the underlying source of the evidence that those academics are bringing it in from?
Yeah. So often I do rely on the academic journal published evidence, and as the sort of foundation, that's often population studies, so where you question people over time. And because tech companies don't share their data properly, you often ask a young person, how much time do you estimate you spend online? And then you track how they develop over the next few years. And, Rebecca Fuljambe did mention some studies of my own on UK data. So it's inherently limited because we don't have a good exposure measure. So we're not measuring, are they seeing really harmful content? Are they seeing, the horrendous things that Rebecca was mentioning, killing kittens, kitten in the blender videos we did know was... so all these do happen, and we don't have that accuracy to measure that. But then more and more what my DSIT report focused on is that those longitudinal studies aren't enough, and we need to become more agile in our evidence creation. And we can do that by going into the field and actually changing things and seeing what happens. And I think that's where that real evidence limit lies, because we haven't done that much on the different interventions we are discussing. Right. So I think that's important for us to learn to do better as well on AI.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you very much. Thank you. Could you write to us and say what requirements you would like to see placed on social media companies in order to give you the evidence, whether that be APIs or access to the algorithms, etc.?
We are writing an open report on that at the moment.
We're going to finish with a final question from Daniel. That's
very quickly, Daniel Zeishner, Member of Parliament for Cambridge. I'm interested in the difference between the evidence base that is being used in Australia, America and here. Are there any differences and are they significant? This is to you, Professor Orban.
Yeah, I don't think there are. We often interchangeably use evidence across countries which we would call the sort of global north, which includes Australia and the UK. And actually we do not have a study at the moment in healthy under 18s that has reduced or limited social media to see what happens. So there's one in Denmark which did so and didn't find an impact on life satisfaction, but then there was one in the US that did limit social media for young people under 18s who had pre-existing mental health conditions that did find a positive impact. So, but actually I don't know of any experimental work that has gone on in the UK, even though a lot of the longitudinal kind of population level evidence provision is on UK data because of the quality of our data resources.
More work to be done. A final question: how could effective evaluation be built into the design of any proposed ban? That seems to me to be a really important point to finish on.
Yes, thank you. And I think the Australians did a great job at that point. And so an evaluation framework that I think could be really valuable we've already started. So we've worked with the eSafety Commissioner over the last year to develop that evaluation framework. One of the things that's missing, and this is a quote from business that I think applies here, is measure what matters to you. I think that's what we're trying to do in Australia. But one of the problems that us academics have is none of us agree on what is exactly the best thing to measure or how. And what I would like...
what would be in one sentence then, what would be the key test of whether this has worked in 2 years' time in Australia?
There is no one key thing to measure. That's the problem. But it's okay. That's okay. But what we need to measure are the things that the people of the UK in particular care about. In Australia, it's about kids' experiences online, about their exposure to harms and their ability to flourish, but also these family dynamics, which are often missed, although I think that's really what's driving a lot of this. So if we can develop standard measures that we've already begun in Australia, we will have working with the Home Office here in the UK to put the same evaluation framework we have in Australia here in the UK. That'll take place later this month. We'll also have that going out in New Zealand this month. So if we can standardize those measures around those different things I said that we need to measure, that will allow us to understand how different policies around the world are affecting children, but also the families.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's why this policy question is it's so broad that what people would like a social media ban to impact. You have conversation with the Home Office about radicalization, with Department for Health and Social Care about health outcomes. You might be thinking about myopia. You might be thinking about conflict in families. And I think, while I think we will start seeing evidence coming out of Australia in the next 6 months, I think we should be ready that there'll be conflicting evidence. There's about 15 evaluations that I know of that are independently trying to evaluate Australia, and what success looks like isn't clear. And I think for me, it's also not clear what that would be in the UK. So I think the important thing for us to consider is what exactly would we want a ban to produce, and then to measure that appropriately. And the best is to compare very similar populations that did or did not get the ban. So if you can do a staged approach where only one age group gets it at a time, that can improve the evidence base. But naturally, for example, we could also compare young people in Northern Ireland with those living in Ireland just across the border who will experience potentially different regimes. So those sort of policy, natural experiment policy evaluations will be critical.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. We could continue to discuss this critical and fascinating and contentious in many ways subject. We've learned a lot from hearing from you, and particularly appreciate your contribution, Commissioner Inman. And we look forward to seeing the evaluation, and your input today will influence our input to the government's consultation that is ongoing here. So huge thanks for your contribution, and we will continue this discussion, I am sure, at another time. Order.
Thank you.